Welcome to How to Write Good. My name is Daniel Poppy, and this is How to Write Good. You can find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. You can also check out How to Write Good on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I am most active on Instagram if you want to check that out. Besides that, what was I going to say? Oh, you can check out my serialized novel. My serialized novel is called One Last Toast for Ebenezer Fleet. And it is on this feed, but it's also on its own feed. If you don't like listening to this, you can always check that out as well. And besides that, you can check out my book, The Ninth Hour. You can get that on Amazon if you'd like to. One quick note. So today is a guest, and there were some issues with my audio. He sounds just fine, but there were some issues with my audio. So excuse me, I'm sorry about that. There was an issue with the microphone. I can't fix it right now. But right now, I'm just going to introduce you to Vince, and I just really hope you like the show today. Do you think there are any good arguments for being an atheist?
For being an atheist?
Yeah. Do you think there's any?
Actually, this is a fun topic to talk about.
Yeah.
I don't think there are, and I don't think there are good arguments for believing that God exists either.
Really?
Actually, I don't think so.
Okay. So why don't you think that there's no good arguments for being an atheist?
For being an atheist,
Yeah,
in particular.
Go on.
So the usual argument, here's the main argument for atheism. It's something like the problem of evil, which apparently that wasn't actually used as an argument for atheism. It was more just here's a problem that, if you're a traditional Judeo-Christian believer, you should be able to have some kind of response to this problem. It wasn't an objection. But lately it's been cashed out as an objection to the existence of at least an all-loving, all-powerful God. All-knowing God, right? So, and that's something so this was actually made popular by Lex Luthor in Batman versus Superman. No, I'm just kidding. It was sort of...
Did he use it?
Well, no, he made that stupid thing reference to Superman. He's like, I learned if God is all powerful, he cannot be all good. And it was like, oh yeah, great job, Luthor.
Yeah,
and,
it's this is
yeah.
But no, Lex Luthor. Pause. Did you like Lex Luthor in Batman vs Superman?
No, I hated everything about Batman Superman except for Batman himself.
Okay, go on about atheism and that argument.
Okay, so that's the most famous argument now, and they say and I think the way it's cashed out. I don't know if it's I shouldn't say it's the most famous, but it's a very popular one, at least among my experience. And it goes something like, look, if God really was all-knowing and all-powerful and all-loving, then you wouldn't have gratuitous evils in the world. But you do have gratuitous evils in the world. Mm-hmm. A random, it's hard to deny that, some instances of suffering are gratuitous and unnecessary. God could have prevented them and you wouldn't have avoided some great good or some greater evil by making that suffering happen. So that means that, since we do have gratuitous evils, it means that an all-loving, all-good, all-knowing God doesn't exist. Of course, Judeo-Christian religion says that there is such an all-good, all-knowing, all-powerful God. So Judeo-Christian theology is wrong. Why is that an argument for atheism? I guess it's technically not. It's technically an argument for it's an argument against Western theism, Western traditions of theism, but it's sort of this undercuts a lot of motivations for theism, at least the common theisms of the West, right? Okay, so it's not totally an argument for atheism, but it's usually cashed out at least as an argument against Western theism.
Yeah, I didn't see that as an argument for atheism either. I just saw it as okay, this is an argument against there being that type of God.
Yeah, that sounds right.
There could be another type of God that doesn't fit in specific God,
right,
or whatever.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I shouldn't have said it's an argument for atheism because it's not.
Right. But they use it as an argument for atheism. People do use it as an argument for atheism.
Right. And maybe the thought is something like, hey, if there is a God, then at least the Western view has probably got it right, but the Western view probably has it wrong. So at least it looks like from this argument it has it wrong. But I think that at least the people who know better, what they use it for is they use it as an argument against a particular version of theism, the Western version. And then to get atheism, they supplement it with things like what's more likely, all things considered, theism in general or atheism in general. And we have good reasons to prefer theism or atheism in general. Maybe there's some things about simplicity like of the hypothesis and blah 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 blah, and it make all things considered, it makes more. It's a simpler explanation to say that there is no God than there is a God, and so we have a reason to affirm atheism. We have better reason to affirm atheism than theism.
Okay.
So those are the arguments, and then maybe I should have just ignored the problem of evil because the second argument's better, insofar as it just covers all versions of theism. And you wanted an argument for atheism in general, and well, that's the actual one. That's the argument for atheism in general.
It's just that it's more likely that atheism is the case is the argument that
right, and you should proportion your beliefs, and you should proportion your beliefs to the evidence or something like that. So, if you have better reason, all things considered, to affirm atheism than theism, then you have a sort of like rational obligation to believe that atheism is true rather than theism is true.
Okay.
I don't find these arguments convincing just because when you try to say, well, what theory is simpler? What theory is more elegant, and say, is atheism a better explanation? It doesn't seem to me like that's right. Or it's not clear to me that that's right, that atheism is the better explanation. It seems like, and this is really just in some sense, if this is an educated opinion, it's only because I have an education. It's not because I've actually thought much about this. I mean, there are people who know much more about this, but some of them agree with me, so I'm gonna say it. The thought is something like, when you're trying to assess probabilities, you're already packing in some assumptions that you're making.
Yeah.
And so when you're assessing whether a view is simpler or whether it more elegantly or it better explains something or other, when you're making that assessment, you have a lot of assumptions going on in the background.
The fact that you're using the word term, if you are using the term elegant, there's a value. Like you're assuming that there's a different value between the two things, and because you can't measure elegance, and I don't think we can measure elegance.
Yeah, they try to do things like, well, how many entities do you posit in your explanation? Do you posit just one fundamental entity? Do you posit more than one? If you posit just one, you're simpler, and so simplicity factors into elegance. Maybe it's sort of like, I can't remember. I don't know. There's another. There are papers that talk about this. I don't remember the titles of them, but they try to give an account of what goes into elegance, and simplicity is one of the things that go, and maybe coherence is another one.
Yeah.
Of what goes into, and maybe modesty, like how many entailments of your views do you have?
Yeah.
So in a way, they try to give conditions for how you can assess what makes the view elegant.
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily make sense to me because if you say, oh, it's simple and whatever, and it fits all the criteria of being elegant, but it doesn't actually match the real world, then it doesn't matter. Like if it doesn't actually fit into what actually is the case in reality, then that doesn't matter.
Yeah, but they might say, I think they'd say something like, right, this could be wrong, but because it meets these conditions, you're justified in believing it more than this other view, which, even if it's right, it doesn't meet these conditions.
Okay.
Yeah. Does that kind of make sense? It's about like, what are you justified in believing?
I get why they're saying it. I don't agree with the elegant argument. Like I don't agree with this is more of an elegant argument. Therefore, it's more likely that it's the case that it's true. Therefore, we should go with it. I think that you should go with like the world isn't how the world at least presents itself to us isn't necessarily elegant in all the cases. And one of the things that isn't elegant about the world is the problem of evil.
Yeah.
I don't think that aspect of reality is elegant at all. And you can't tease. It's hard to tease out any reason. Then you're going at the reason. She's like, well, there's the problem of evil, so that adds to that because it's not elegant. It's not reasonable. It doesn't fit into that paradigm. Therefore, we should think this way. But I don't know if you're going up against like with an atheist worldview, I just don't think that saying, oh, this is a cleaner, this seems to be a better argument, therefore we should just like go with it. To me this seems like the more elegant argument. I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, the way it was sort of pitched to me was something like this. Imagine like I tell you there's a ghost in the corner of the room, and then I add something else, say, oh, by the way, this ghost is a Cubs fan. Which one are you better? If you have to believe one of those things, which one are you going to believe? Or here's the two options. There's a ghost in the corner of the room. That's the first option. Or you can believe there's a ghost in the corner of the room and that ghost is a Cubs fan.
Well, if there's a ghost in the corner of the room, I don't know if it's, I mean, there's more to assume if you're saying it's a
Right.
Cubs fan, but if you're assuming there's a ghost in the corner of the room already, I don't know why. Like,
Yeah.
is it really a stretch to say, oh, this ghost is also a Cubs fan?
Well, the thought is supposed to be something like this: the more you say, the more likely you are that you're going to say something wrong.
Okay.
So there's already a risk that I'm saying something wrong if I assert that there's a ghost in the corner of the
Yep.
room. Even more likely to be wrong if I make a specification about the ghost, namely that he's a Cubs fan,
Okay.
right? Or that he's a boy or something like that, maybe a
Yeah.
man. So the thought is like, well, so because you're saying more, you're more likely to be wrong.
Yeah.
You're less justified in affirming that more complicated belief than, or more complicated proposition than the simpler one.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
Saying
So
it.
that's why, right. So that's how they factor in sort of elegance. And they think about it maybe in terms of simplicity, among
Yeah.
other things. That, whichever view commits you to less has less of a chance of being wrong, and thus you should affirm the simpler one.
Okay.
And maybe elegance is something like that. Whichever view is more complicated, has more opportunities to be wrong, and thus
Yeah.
you're less justified in believing it. My objection is that when you give accounts about what's more likely or what's it seems like you're making assumptions there already about what is more likely or what's not more likely, and it's hard to see, like, when you evaluate those assumptions, what it goes down to is it seems like what it goes down to is your intuitions about what is more likely or not, right? You say this is more likely than that, and it's like, well, somebody else could disagree with you and say, why do you think that's more likely? And you're going to give some kind of intuition you've got.
Yeah.
Well, not everybody's going to share that intuition, and so what it means is, like, you're already presupposing the answer to your question that God doesn't exist if you have an intuition which sort of entails that God does not exist. Does that kind of make sense? When you're doing your probabilities and your assessments, you're determining what's more likely or what's not more likely. You already have intuitions that have determined the outcome for you.
Yeah. That makes sense. Your pushback against it. So, is there any more you were going to say about the atheism stuff?
Let me think. I think that wraps it up for the atheism part.
So for deism, you don't think there's any good arguments either.
Right, because I think that theism also relies on assumptions or intuitions like that. So, like, the arguments for theism are something like, there's like the cosmological argument. Where did all this come from? It had to come from some cause. And then there's there's the Kalam cosmological argument, which is like everything that began to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, so the universe has a cause. Then there's like a teleological argument, which is everything is made for some purpose, and I can't remember exactly how it's supposed to go, but it's supposed to go from because everything is made for a purpose. Somehow it entails the conclusion that God exists. I can't remember exactly how the teleological argument goes. Then there's like the ontological argument, which is sort of like, given the kind of being that God is supposed to be, he must exist.
Well, yeah, isn't the ontological argument, is this the one where since we can think about it, therefore it must be the case?
Yeah, it's sort of like, given how you understand what God is, God must exist.
Okay.
So it's sort of like, God is this being that necessarily, given the sort of thing he is, he'd have to necessarily exist. If God is possible, then he would necessarily exist. Well, God is possible, so he necessarily exists.
Okay.
That means that there is a God. It couldn't be that there is no God. But all these arguments, there are really good objections to, like, the ontological argument is saying you can't go from semantics, the definition of a term, to the existence of a being.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the objections to the teleological argument, but then there's like the cosmological argument, and it goes something like, do we really have good reasons to believe the universe does have a cause? And there are some good reasons to think that maybe the universe was never caused to begin with. We should be open to the idea that it never was, given apparently some work in theoretical physics that's going out there now. There's another argument for theism, which is sort of like the design argument. Sort of like, if you look at the way the universe is designed, and everything seems to fit together just right. It seems to be like this beautiful, well-functioning machine, and that suggests to you that there was a designer, right? It seems the universe is designed, so there must be a designer. So there's a designer being God. But then there's like evolutionary objections to this. Like, if you look at the human body, it's supposed to be the token example of a well-functioning machine. That was thought to prove that God exists, or at least to give evidence that God exists. And now it's like, well, evolution has given you a good reason to sort of doubt that that's the case. That you need a designer in order to get what we have right now in the human body. So I think those are good arguments. Those are good objections, I think.
Yeah.
So it's not clear to me that any of those arguments for theism actually work. I said before I thought that the same problem about intuitions applies to theism as well. So maybe I don't want to say that after all. Maybe I think it's just that there are some pretty good objections to theism. But what that tells me is one way or the other. Okay, so look, theism doesn't work. Their arguments don't work. And by the way, the atheism arguments don't work.
Yeah.
So it's like, what are we supposed to do? You could say, well, I guess you don't have arguments either way. You should just suspend belief.
Yeah.
But I don't think that that's the case. I think that, and this is something I'm toying with, and I don't know if this is actually going to work. A lot of people think it's kind of stupid, but it makes sense to me. It seems like what happens is you start off with this sort of assumption about the way the world. You have this sort of general view about the way the world is. Here, let me present to you the way other people have presented this. Mm-hmm. They've said, or presented something different. What they'll say is like, it seems to me like God exists, and I don't have any reasons to think that this seeming is unreliable.
Yeah.
So I'm justified in thinking that God exists. It's sort of like your sense perceptions.
Yeah.
So like, it seems to you like there's a computer in front of you, and you have no reasons to doubt that impression is wrong, right?
Yeah.
So on virtue of that, you believe that there's a computer in front of you, and you're justified in believing that there's a computer in front of you.
Okay.
Right? Same thing for it seems to you that God exists, and there's no defeater for that claim, right? Why? Well, because you saw all the arguments for atheism seem to be ones that maybe are question-begging or unmotivated. So you don't have any reason to doubt that seeming is unreliable. So you're justified in believing that God exists.
Okay.
Maybe the atheist could do the same thing and say, yeah, but then I'm justified in believing that God does not exist, right? For the same reasons. It seems to me like he doesn't exist, and all of your arguments for theism don't work. So it seems like God does not exist, and I have no defeaters, so I'm justified in thinking that God exists. I think that's interesting. It's not clear how you're supposed to sort of get past that, change someone's beliefs. But here's how I think about it. Like, I was thinking about this. Like, I believe that God exists, but then people who are atheists give me these arguments, and then it's like, well, a lot of the reasons why I give for why I believe, if I'm trying to give arguments, don't seem to work. Well, then why should I continue to believe? And why am I not tempted to abandon my belief in the face of these arguments? And you can give some kind of story like, oh, it's just because, you just grew up with it. It's hard to abandon a belief you grew up with. But maybe it's more like this. It's like I look at the picture of the world that is given by Christianity, and I find that to be an attractive picture. And on the other hand, I look at a picture of the world that is given on this sort of naturalist, atheist picture. There's no, designer. There's no sort of absolute purpose of, maybe absolute is probably not the right word, but there's no higher purpose, meta purpose behind what we do. It's just whatever sort of purposes we create for ourselves. And that's a very unattractive picture. And so because this one picture is so attractive, I'm compelled to believe it. And I'm compelled by how attractive it is to believe it. And maybe I'm going to argue that I'm justified in believing that. I'm on the basis of the fact that it's attractive, because I think that everybody does that. An atheist will look and say, I find the Christian picture extremely unattractive. And I find this naturalist one very attractive. And I think that that's what the atheist is doing. They're attracted to this one picture, and that's why they believe it. And they might try to deny it and say, no, I've got arguments. And it's like, well, I have arguments too, but you don't like the arguments I give you. And they're going to say, yeah, the same thing for you. So I think everyone does that. Everybody starts off with this view that they find attractive, and they stick with it, and they run with it, and they try to see, how can I make this work?
Yeah.
If you're a Christian, let me pause for a second. Are you bored by this? Do you want me to stop talking about it?
No, keep on going. It's interesting.
Okay. If you're a Christian, you are attracted to this picture of God's existence, and maybe an all good God existing, and you get these objections, and you don't reject the belief on the problem of evil. You are not compelled to reject the view. You're going to say, wow, interesting. I've got to figure out how to solve this problem. What are we supposed to say about the problem of evil? The atheist is like, well, why are you sticking with the Christianity view? You should reject it in the face of this argument. And you're like, and the reason why they're thinking that is because they already think look, here's a pretty standard objection. This should make you abandon your belief. But they don't have that sort of attraction to the Christian view that you want to run with. Likewise, if you present an objection to atheism, I don't know, I haven't thought too much about what an objection would go like, but someone could come up with one. If you present an objection to atheism, they're going to say, oh, well, here, I have something I can say about that. But the same rationale applies. Like, why don't you just abandon your belief in atheism? And I think the reason why is because they're attracted to that picture. What you're doing is you're fleshing out a story as you go through life, as you encounter arguments, as you encounter objections to your view. You're fleshing out a story, and you're constantly reassessing and saying, is this picture still attractive?
Yeah.
And eventually, maybe as you flesh it out, you're finding, this isn't an attractive picture anymore. Maybe you'll abandon your belief. That's what happens maybe when people who are Christians, end up, I know there are people that do this, they abandon their belief in Christianity, they go towards atheism because it seems like they just, as they're developing this picture, they find it less and less attractive. And they go towards what they do find attractive instead, naturalism or atheism. And the same thing for a naturalist. They might think like, hey, God does not exist. And they're fleshing out this picture, and then they find like, I find this less and less attractive, and this other view more and more attractive, and thus they migrate over. So I think it's basically just like what you're doing is you're trying to flesh out a story, you're trying to flesh out a picture of the world and seeing what works, and you're running with what seems to work best to you. And it's just automatic. It's not like a clear, like, here's a deductive argument for the conclusion that God does not exist, or that God does exist. What matters is like, here's a story, and which one do you like better? And people are just moving towards one or the other. That's how I think it actually works. And I mean, is that justified? It seems like if it's not justified, then a lot of things that you'd want to say are justified are not, because I think everybody does that all over the place. They do it whether they believe that there are like abstract objects that are not abstract objects, if they think that, trope theory is right, or if like Platonism of properties is right. Everyone does it all over the place. And if you can't have justified beliefs about God's existence for this reason, then you can't have justified beliefs about any metaphysical view for this reason. But I think you can have justified beliefs on metaphysical views, so you also can have justified beliefs about God's existence or God's non-existence, simply on the basis of how attractive you find the general picture. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I think so. This is what it sounds like. It sounds like we don't have any arguments that can be well supported either way. And because we don't have any arguments, and we don't have any way to test it scientifically or anything like that, the only way we can actually make a decision about this is through our experience and through trying to see where that it's kind of like a value thing. It's like, okay, is this good or not? So we kind of base it off of whether this thing is good. That's what it seems like.
Yeah, it seems like you're making a judgment call about how attractive do you find this view.
Yeah, what it seems like you're saying is that you say, since we don't have any other way to navigate this and figure out whether it's true or not, we just have to go through life and keep on trying to push forward and outward and bringing things together to determine whether it actually is true.
Yeah.
So that's the only way we can do it, and that is how we function in the world for tons of things. And since everybody does it, therefore it's justified you are justified in saying, yes, I believe this because of I have this picture and I see that it's good, and these are the reasons essentially why I see it's good. Therefore, I'm going to believe this instead of the alternative.
Yeah, it seems like
you're saying.
Yeah, that's roughly right. So I mean, I wasn't being very articulate, but the thought is like, if you say that's not justified, then there are a lot of other beliefs that you have which you're also going to want to have to say are unjustified, and you don't want to say that. I mean, it's sort of like a kind of skepticism, because it's claiming you can't have knowledge that God exists. You also can't have knowledge that God does not exist. And you have to give a lot of credence to people who say that they are justified in thinking God does not exist. I don't know if that rubs people the wrong way. It used to rub me the wrong way to be a Christian, and also to say that people aren't... It'd be strange, I thought, to say I'm a Christian, but I think people are justified in denying the existence of God. But now I've gotten more... I'm okay with that now, saying that there are people who are justified in their belief that God does not exist. I would say that they're wrong, but I mean they have good enough reasons, and because their reasons are roughly like mine, it's ultimately a judgment call. You can't have knowledge, but you have this sort of like obligation now, this rational obligation to keep pursuing the view and fleshing out the view against objections and hearing people who disagree, so you can keep developing your view better and assessing whether you think it's attractive or not.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It's weird to think about.
And the only reason I think this is because it seems to me that's the best way to explain. I think it's the most generous way to explain why people, in the face of objections to theism or atheism, continue to hold their beliefs and to press and say, here's why I'm not motivated by your argument. Otherwise, they'll just look like they're either begging the question or they're just not being sincere. I think this is the best way to explain that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that they're good arguments?
Well, so arguments for atheism, when I look at them or when I hear them, I'm like, I don't see how those are good. The only argument for deism that I see that the strongest one I see would be, is it called the ontological argument is the one where since things exist, therefore they must come from somewhere.
That's the cosmological.
That's the cosmological argument. Sorry. So I think that's the strongest one I have. That I think would be the strongest argument for there being a God, because you're saying, okay, so there is something. Now you have to define something in the same. You have to, there's something rather than nothing, right? And in physics, when you look at like really high physicists, they're like, well, actually, like you have this stuff that isn't really anything. You have dark matter or whatever it is, and they're defining nothing in a different way than someone who makes that argument.
Right.
Because like what people were making that argument say is this is absolutely nothing. There's nothing. They're like the absence of everything, and so I think that when they come up with these, they're saying, oh well, this actually came like this is the reason why it can happen. They're actually saying that okay, like this is the reason why it happened, but there's still something that's coming from. And on top of that, what they're also saying is there's specific rules that are already in place that allow this to happen. So it's like, where did those rules come from?
Yeah,
I think I agree with you in large part saying that I always hold what I always think is like you can never be absolutely certain either way, but I think that is the strongest argument for the existence of God. And so that's what I would say. It's just like, okay, so why is there something rather than nothing at all?
Yeah. No, okay, so I think I agree. I broadly agree with what you're saying. Like, I find the cosmological argument to be the best one for God's existence as well. And mainly because I don't understand what it would mean to deny one of the premises of the argument. So it sounds like what you're saying is, look, the universe did begin to exist. There's something began to exist, right? What are those laws or whatever it is? And so the pushback, which I kind of understand, is that, well, let's just deny that anything began to exist. Maybe the universe eternally existed or something like that. And in that case, because you don't have a beginning of existence, you have no reason to posit the cause, the one thing that brought it into existence. Maybe it eternally and necessarily exists. And if you're okay with an eternally or necessarily existing and eternally existing God, then why aren't you okay with an eternally and necessarily existing universe?
Well, what I would say back to that is, if the universe is God, then
not that's God, just that's eternally and necessarily existing.
The universe is eternally and necessarily existing, and it's just like to infinity, to however far it goes. It's just dead matter that doesn't think, and there's nothing to it, right? It's just I would say that I think it's more reasonable, and this is more of like going back to your, I think this is good. I think it's more reasonable to say that, I think it's more reasonable to believe that there is a godlike being, right? Like, I think that how people usually think of God, I think that if God exists, God extends beyond what people think or what God is like. People paint pictures of God. I think that God goes beyond how people can think about God, right? So I think that I think it's more reasonable to say there is a being existing eternally and by itself, like it's self-sustaining, than saying the universe exists.
In the same way, eternally and necessarily?
Yeah. I think it's more reasonable to say that there is a God, right? That's the term we're going to use it. I think it's more reasonable to say that God is eternally and necessarily existing than the universe.
Yeah. So I'm inclined to agree. But so here's my response, and on behalf of the atheist, and it's not going to be very convincing, but at least it's probably not going to be very convincing. But I mean, I'm kind of convinced by it. It goes something like this: Can contemporary physical theories give us a very plausible story according to which the universe might have eternally or necessarily existed.
Mm-hmm.
And if those theories are plausible, then we should have good reason to believe those things are true, and that's enough to undermine the objection that's more reasonable, or undermine the claim that's more reasonable to believe that God exists like that than that a universe exists like that. Now, I don't understand those physical views because I'm not a physicist.
Yeah.
Here I kind of default to the experts and say, hey, if that's plausible, then I'll bite the bullet and say, yeah, okay, I think if I'll take them at their word that if there's such a plausible theory, then yeah, that's an option, and that kind of undermines the claim that it makes more sense to say God exists that way than that the universe exists that way. I for one, I just don't understand it. I don't understand what it means for the universe to exist eternally.
Yeah.
How could you ever get to like the present if there's an eternal everlasting past, or if you can go infinitely far into the past? How do you ever get to the present?
Yeah.
I understand that objection, so I don't get it. But it seems like people who know what they're talking about do get it, so I'm skeptical that I'm understanding it correctly.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes me doubt doubt the cosmological argument after all.
Yeah. And I mean,
even if I don't understand the objection.
Yeah, and that argument is based on a logical fallacy. The objection that you have.
Okay, really?
Well, yeah, it's because it's an appeal to authority.
Well, sort of. I mean...
Well, if you had these specific reasons, right, you're saying these people probably know more than me, therefore I should... I think that, okay, so if you're only basing on the fact that, okay, these people have done more research than me in this area, they're the experts in this area, if you're just saying that that's appeal to authority, now you're not going totally into it because you're saying, okay, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they actually know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say, hey, there is a good reason to believe that there is an eternally existing universe, right?
Yeah.
So that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
But
if I was just...
you actually know that argument, unless you actually know how it works behind that, you just have to say, well, there's these people who are experts essentially in that field, therefore maybe that's what they're talking about, right?
Yeah. Let me think here.
Like, yeah, what?
I was going to say, here's a clear case of an appeal to authority. It's like, well, my pastor said this, and therefore it's true.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. I'm trying to wonder, is this really analogous to that? I don't think so. I mean, I think it's kind of analogous, but I think that I don't know the theory. You're right. I don't know the theory behind it. But I can say a little bit more than just that they said it. I mean, I can say that there are dominant views in physics now, and the people who take these views seriously, I'm taking them at their word, and I'm assuming that they know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And since they take these views seriously, that would present a serious objection.
Okay.
And so, since this is a viable option, even if I don't understand it, I do. I think that undermines the cosmological argument. So maybe it's not, strictly speaking, just an appeal to authority. It's sort of an appeal to there is a standard view, which I don't understand, but there is a standard, a dominant view out there.
Appealing to the standard isn't appealing to the standard view and appealing to authority.
It's what I'm doing is I'm appealing to a view which I don't quite understand, but by saying it's a standard, what I'm showing is that it has some credibility to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that you should say, oh, just because I don't understand it, I should dismiss it.
Yeah.
But I don't think that if you, because I think it's probably the case that in most of what we do, we generally, like how we function is we see the world and we make assumptions based off of what we see. But I think a lot of what we also do is we base assumptions off of what we're told. Mm-hmm. That's just kind of how we have to function in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
You had to assess every little thing, like every belief you had. I think there are certain beliefs you should assess and you should think about. And I think that whether God exists or not is one of those. And you should decide, okay, this is why I believe it or this is why I don't believe it. There are certain beliefs that are so important that I think you should. But if you had to, like, if there were every single belief that you had to assess on a really minute level, then you wouldn't have time to do anything else. Most people wouldn't. I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. So, one last thing to vindicate myself from the charge of, if that's the right word.
Appeal to authority.
So one way to defend myself there is to say, okay, so this is just the last thing, just to make sure.
Yeah.
If I presented, maybe it'd be really, really bad if I said, therefore the cosmologic argument fails because this standard view. But I want to say that this makes me skeptical that the cosmological argument is sound.
Yeah.
So I'm hedging my bets there a little bit. Okay.
No,
That was. I just wanted to add that in there.
I don't think there's any bad will on your part, and I think I understand
Okay.
what you're saying. It's just like, it's really coming to a point where you're like, I'm not absolutely certain.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I
just
think that's a good place to be.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to be.
And if you say you're absolutely certain, I mean, okay, so I think there's certain cases where it's like, I'm absolutely certain about this. Let's just say you are someone who is in whatever religion, and you have a religious experience. Like, you have something that almost, it's like, I have no other way to explain this. This has to be something from, like, that is from God, right? If you have an experience like that, and you're like, well, there's no other reasonable way to say that this is actually this is incorrect. And I would say that if you're like, okay, I'm certain that God exists because of this, I think that's reasonable because that's your experiences. Like, if somebody slaps you in the face, you're like, oh, like, somebody slapped me in the face. This pain comes from this slap in the face. That there's no reason to doubt that. If somebody has an experience where they're like, this is like, they have essentially a proof. Then I feel like I can't argue with that. I actually have a friend who's like, you can't argue with experience. So if somebody's coming at you like that, I can see somebody saying, yeah, I'm absolutely certain God exists. I don't think you can come from the atheistic perspective and say, I'm absolutely certain God doesn't exist.
Because there can be no correspondence experience of a negative existence, right?
So I think there can be. I think that you can say, oh, like, I'm absolutely certain because of a certain experience, and this experience must be from God, right? So one of the thing, if you go back to like Christianity, the experience that must be from God is like Christ rising from the dead, right? If you actually saw somebody die, you are certain they're dead, and they rose from the dead. That is pretty strong proof that that God does exist, and this is true, right?
Or that there's some kind of the story about what happens after people die needs to be more complicated than just that they're gone, right?
Yeah, or at the very least, there is something happening beyond, like, at the very least.
Yeah, you're right.
But so I think that's still, it's stronger proof, and it's like, okay, so this happened, or like you have stuff in the Bible, you have the Transfiguration, right? That is like a thing where like, okay, so what is this exactly? What's going on? Some people might say, well, they were taking shrooms or they were taking what other drug. But if the actual person went into that situation, they weren't on drugs, they were in their clear mind, and this happened, what are you going to assume about that?
Right.
So
I guess, So I guess you're right. I should hedge my original story then and say this is the story I have about, like, judging based on like what pictures are most attractive. I guess that's a story that applies for most people, but I mean there should be those few people that have like these the right kinds of religious experiences which confer certainty, of God's existence. That sounds right. But you're also that wouldn't justify other people's beliefs, certainty, but it would justify their own. Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, so I think that from a religious perspective, you could say, no, I did have an experience, and I am certain about this because of that experience. I don't think you can say it from the atheistic perspective or the atheist perspective, but I think it's the case that most people just need to be humble and be like, I'm not 100% certain that this is what I believe because, like, you're basing it off that quality, that whether it's good, whether it's, I don't know the word you used before.
I don't know. I don't remember either. I wasn't listening to myself talk.
Whether it's good or not is but I think also there's a case where I think that what goes along with assessing what is the more attractive picture, I think that's how you said it, is what is the most, what belief is going to actually bring about the best reality. And I think that's also something people use to determine whether or not they believe something.
Yeah, I think that
even if let's just take like a really antagonistic view toward religion. Now, I think that if you are a Christian, you believe certain things, therefore you believe there's morality and there's good and bad, and that fits into that worldview. But let's just say that if you're an atheist, I don't think that necessarily fits into the worldview well. because where does that stuff come from? But at the same time, I think that you can say, okay, because we're in the world, this is how we perceive the world, this is how we experience the world. We know that there is good. We don't know where it comes from. We know that there's bad. There's things that are more beneficial than others. Therefore, we should pick the thing that's going to bring the most benefit, in a way. Now we have to determine what constitutes the most benefit. Now, is the most benefit for the most amount of people, or is the most benefit something else that's more complicated? Which I would say it's something more complicated than just what's going to benefit the most amount of people, because if you benefit the most amount of people, if you enslave 1% of the population and that makes everybody else's life better, that's going to justify it. So I think people do actually work that way, and I think it's based off of kind of what you're saying, and this is the best picture. This creates the best picture, this is the most attractive picture of the world, therefore I'm going to believe it, and I think that grows out of it at the very least.
Yeah.
Why do you're such an idiot?
No. That would be bad, because what you're saying was that you kind of agree with what I was saying. So if I called you an idiot, that would be like me calling myself an idiot. And that may be true, but I wouldn't want to say that. What was I going to say? I was going to add, no, I'm not going to call you an idiot. You're not an idiot. I'm sorry. That's not, I was pausing. I was like, the way it said that sounds like I was calling Dan an idiot. I don't know.
How you paused?
Yeah.
How you're like, well, yes, but no.
No, so I meant like it may be true that I'm an idiot, but I wouldn't want to say that. But then it sounded like I was saying, it may be true that you're an idiot, but I wouldn't want to say that. I was like, that's not what I meant. It's like, gosh darn it. Do you really think that you can't fit? I guess we're going back to the thing I wanted to talk about anyway. So, do you think that you can't really fit morality into a world in which God does not exist?
So I think you can. I don't think it has a. So this is how I think you fit it in. So I think that there is a way to. I don't want to say rationalize, because it has bad connotations, and I don't want to present a straw man on somebody else's argument. But I think this is how you fit it in. I think that if you look at it from the evolutionary perspective, right, you're essentially saying these are the things that are allowing people to live together and thrive the best, right? Because evolution, there's an assumption there that it's like survival. There's a baseline assumption of this is how things survive, right? So you could say, okay, morality and these different things are based on this survival. That people are that. I don't. If you say, the universe has existed forever, and there's no creator of the universe, I don't think that you can go back and say, well, now that let me think about this for a second. Now, you could assume that morality and these different things have existed for eternity along with the universe, right? These things are abstract; and they just exist alongside or whatever, however it works. But when you assume that, you're saying, well, there's these specific ideas that have existed forever, and they exist out of nothing. Essentially, they exist because of nothing. They're just there.
Yeah.
Which somebody might be like, well, you believe that God is just there, but I'm making different assumptions about God because I believe God is a different type of being than what we know to exist, right? So how I view God is very different than how I view the natural world, and how I view God is very different than how I even view morality or specific values we hold, because those things, it's hard to explain, and I think that it's hard to explain because it goes beyond our ability to actually understand it. Because once you start talking about something like that existing for eternity, it's like, well, like, what do we do with that? And I think it goes back to what you were saying about you don't completely understand the world, the world existing eternally into the past. So I don't see it. I don't think it's reasonable to say that these things have existed eternally and they just exist within reality. One of the reasons why I don't think it's the case is because it doesn't become relevant. And maybe this isn't a good argument, but it doesn't become relevant until you have a being that can actually think and is conscious about stuff, right?
Yeah, like you can't. Moral facts don't apply to like dogs or something.
Yeah, and I think it's more reason. I think it's reasonable to say, okay, because of the survival mechanism, these things that we hold to be values and morals in the world come from that survival, and this brings about the best survival for the species, I think that's a lot more reasonable than just to say these things existed for eternity.
Okay. So your objection is sort of tied to evolution, right? It looks like you said, how do you get morality if there's no God? Well, you look at survivability
Okay.
or survival. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, no, I would say that that's how you would get the argument for morality and different things like that.
Yeah.
But there's no, but if you base it off of that, I don't think it matters, right? Now, when you base it off of that, what you're saying is, okay, this is a rule. This is a rule we have that is going to help with the survival of the species. Therefore, we should follow this rule. That's pretty much what I think the best argument is if you're going to say there's no God. But the thing about that is why should I follow the rule? Why should I care about the survival of the species?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that so there's a distinction between moral facts and like moral motivation, right there. So I mean, someone could say something like this: your story explains how there can be morality independent of God, but it doesn't explain how you could have moral motivations independent of God.
Okay. Yeah.
Here's a different account that doesn't rely on evolution.
Sure.
I'm curious about this one, because I think I'm inclined to agree with you in general about the idea that maybe God's necessary for moral motivation, but not necessary for there to be morality in general. And here's the account I'm kind of attracted to. It's like an Aristotelian. I guess it's quasi-Aristotelian. It's the stupid version of Aristotle, which is the only version of Aristotle I understand. It goes like this. It says, like, think of like a hammer, an object out, like a tool, and you say, like, this is a good hammer, and what you mean by that is, like, it does its job really well. It doesn't, like, it's not floppy, and so that it actually hammers things well, and you can pry things out with it. Think of like a good house. Maybe it's a house with like good bones or something like that, and stuff like that. And then you can say he's a good human, and then you talk about what does it mean? Well, he does human-y things very well. He or she acts rationally. They do these right sorts of functions. They do what a human being is supposed to do. And the thought is, like, hey, for each entity you name, like a dog or a cat or a hammer or something like that, there's a function or a thing that the thing is supposed to do. Like a hammer is supposed to hammer stuff in, pry nails out. A house is supposed to, like, shelter somebody over a longer period of time, presumably. A dog is supposed to do doggy stuff. And then a human being has a certain unique function, too. And on Aristotle's view, it was to engage in rational activity. It's this function that only that particular kind of thing can do. And you call it good, you call the entity good when it performs that function well. So you're a good human if you engage in rational activity. And then Aristotle thought that being virtuous was just actually acting rationally in different situations. Like, what would a rational person do in this case? And if you do that, then you're doing the right thing. So in a way, you collapse morality into this proper functioning. And then, so you can say a good person is somebody who, doesn't lie maybe all the time, because, like, maybe lying is a vicious activity. They're not cowardly, but they're not brash. They have temperance, they don't get drunk a lot, and they're not like a stodgy person who refuses to drink at all. They have temperance and different things like that. Like, they engage in rational activity. And so this person, and that's how you get morality. You have obligations to function like a good human being.
Yeah.
And so you can have good and bad, right and wrong. What would a virtuous or vicious person do? It's a sort of a good person is somebody who fulfills the proper role of a human being, and a bad person or vicious is a person who does not fulfill their role of being a good human being, or like does a really bad job of performing their role. And the thought then is that, okay, so now you've got morality, and I didn't invoke God there at all in the story. As long as you have a unique function, that something that only human beings can do, you've got morality. But then the problem is, okay, well, why should I act rationally? Why should I engage in rational activity? What if I really do enjoy just, like, playing Pokemon and like cheating people out of stuff and stuff like that, and living this really like
Cheating a lot of stuff in Pokemon. Okay.
yeah, and like cheating people out of their Pokemon games and stuff like that. What if I enjoy like hijacking, or doing something like that? Living a really bad life. I'm really really happy in this life, and I'm gonna die, and I'm not gonna exist anymore, and no problem, right? So why do I have an obligation to live rationally? You're gonna say, well, you're not being a good human being. Then it's like a hammer that doesn't do a good job hammering. It's not fulfilling its purpose. I'm like, yeah, but I'm pretty darn happy right now. And so what? Give me a reason. Give me a reason to act rationally besides just that I be a good human in principle. And I think then that I'm tempted to say then what this objection, this thought shows is that living or that you need something else besides just like the Aristotelian picture to motivate you to act rationally.
Yeah.
And once you have God there saying, you have there's this afterlife and there's a being that will judge you.
Well, I don't
Then
even
you got
know about
motivation.
the being judging you either, but I keep on going.
It might not.
I'll explain
Okay.
what I mean by that.
Yeah. I do want to hear that. This is kind of half-baked thought I've got, but it seems like once you've got a God in the picture, a God who's going to proportion your life afterwards, like afterlife, to your behavior in the world, probably. You got a motivation to live in the right sort of way,
Mm-hmm.
and hence you need God for moral motivation, but you don't need God for morality. And I know this is kind of Kant's picture. Kant's picture was roughly that. In order to be motivated at all to do the right thing, you have to presuppose that a God exists.
So I think of it like this. So you can, I think that you can come up with morality. You can be like, okay, so we have morality based, like you were talking about. Like I said, like I brought up from like evolution, or you brought up from the reason things exist. Essentially, the
Right.
I can't remember. But I think that you keep on having to have something else you have to explain afterwards. You have to be like, okay, so why should I do this? And then you go back, you're like, okay, so I'm explaining the why beyond this, and you're like, okay, so why does it like? Because there's never a stopping point. It just keeps on going.
Right.
If you don't have God, I think there's never a stopping point. And if you have God, there is a stopping point. And I don't think the stopping point is necessary. If you have a God, if you just say that there is a God, there's more of a logical stopping point than if you just say there isn't. I'm not even getting into which religion you're talking about.
Yeah.
The God you're talking about could even be like more of an Eastern tradition. So like everything is flowing from God, everything is part of God, right? And that's the stopping point. And how that would work is everything has a function, and the reason why everything has a function is because it fits into this larger picture of either what God has created or what is part of God, right?
Yeah.
So that's the stopping point, and that's simplistic, but it's a simple way to say it.
Okay, I get it. I do kind of want to push back though.
Sure.
The thought, because I'm thinking something like this. I mean, the stopping point is supposed to be some answer you give to the question of why, and that answer is something that's intrinsically motivating. The person asks, why should I do that? And they want you to give them a reason that will motivate them to do the right thing, right? Mm-hmm. So it's got to be something that once you say this, that person's like, oh, okay, now I'm motivated to do the right thing. And so you're saying, well, look, maybe it's part of this God's plan, whatever that God is. It could be Eastern, it could be Western. Yeah. It's part of God's plan or God's overall scheme that if you act this way, it's better. Couldn't somebody say, yeah, but look, I mean, I really enjoy this. I don't give a damn about God's plans. I just want to, or God's scheme. I still just want to be happy right now. So it seems like a person could fail to be motivated even by someone pointing out that that's sort of God's plan.
Sure, yeah.
Right?
I guess that runs into the same issue. It sounds like the same issue as saying, okay, why should I do like if you're looking at it from an atheist perspective, and then you have the objection, well, why should I do this? That's a similar issue, right? You're asking, why should I do this? Because even if this is beneficial to everybody else in the world more, why should I do this? And then with God, you're like saying, well, if you have if you bring God into the picture, it's still the same question. Why should I do this? Because, I just want to live my own life and do what I want, and this makes me happy. Or whatever your reason is for living. Maybe it's not happiness that the person says
right.
reason is, but whatever reason they put, that's the same objection in a way, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like if you really want something that's intrinsically motivating, it's like, dude, you're gonna go to hell if you keep doing this, something like that. That's a pretty darn motivating thing.
Yeah.
I can imagine someone being motivated by that.
Well, here's another very motivating thing I think as well. And I think this is more related to what I was saying before. So I was saying
Okay,
that everything fits into how it's supposed to be. And let's just say, let's make it really simplistic. This is God's
okay,
plan, right? And you fit
yeah,
into a specific area of God's plan. So if you don't follow a specific way of doing things, you don't fit into the actual area of God's plan. Well,
hmm
let's go beyond that. Let's say that let's go smaller. I mean, let's say that each individual person, because we're really dealing with people in this situation. We're really dealing with a person who's conscious. I think each individual person is meant to be a specific person, right? That
hmm
they're created in a specific way to fulfill a specific thing, to be a specific person, and to go against that is actually going to be detrimental to them on a personal
okay,
level, right? So I think you have to get to the personal if you're going to talk about it this way. And I think that if you think of it more like this. So if you wipe away like Christianity or whatever, this generic God says this is the way we're supposed to live, right? This generic God,
yeah,
you go back to like ancient gods, and they're like, you're supposed to have sex with a temple prostitute, right?
yeah.
That's part of how you're supposed to live your life. Well, if you go against that, and that actually is what God is saying, then you're not fulfilling what you're actually supposed to be. You're not being the person you're meant to be, so it's going to be detrimental to you in the end.
I see. Okay, so that's kind of similar to what I was saying, because I was saying it's detrimental if you don't do it, but you're saying it could be detrimental to you even during the current life, not in the afterlife.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's actually there's a writer that I listened to some of his stuff, and he actually talks. He's a Christian, and I think he was just really just a. He wasn't an atheist. I don't think. I just think he was more secular. And he's like, yeah, like his viewpoint is that because he is a Christian, he's like, well, if you aren't a Christian, or if you you're not just a Christian to avoid hell. You're a Christian because it allows you to be your full self.
hmm
That's one of his reasons behind like you're not a
I
Christian
see.
just to avoid hell. You are actually a lot. You're incapable of being who you're meant to be, but you're incapable of being you're fully human without believing this, without like following after God. Essentially, that's kind of his way of thinking about it.
Okay, so do you think that fits in with the idea of that you need God for moral motivation? Um,
For the why behind something,
yeah, the motivation behind doing something, not necessarily why that it's good or bad, but that you need God to motivate you to do something.
I I don't know.
Um, so I mean, the thought there is okay. You need God. You need to. Do you say you need God or you need to obey God in order to be motivated, in order to be the best kind of human you can be?
Well,
Which
so
would you put?
this is what I think. So I think that that's tough. So I think that if you don't have a God, there's no end stop to say this is what the best human you can be is, right?
Ah, okay.
There's nothing there's no you can say these are the reasons why this is what a human is, and specifically what you should be as a human, right? But in the
hmm
end, you keep on there's nothing firm to stand on to say this is the reason behind why you should be this. So it goes back to the why, but we can say, oh, this is what you can say. Okay, I'm gonna go in circles. You can say, okay, these are all the reasons why you should be this human, but in the end, you can go beyond that. You can say, well, this really doesn't matter because you're coming up with these ideas, um, and since
Yeah.
you're the one coming up with these ideas, therefore I can come up with a completely different idea, and why isn't my idea more valid? And there you could say, well, because I'm basing my ideas on logic. And you could say, why are my ideas based on logic? Why are your ideas based on logic more valuable than my ideas that are not based on logic? Because logic is just something created by humans, and I don't think it's the case that and that's maybe the person's like, I don't think it's the case that humanity can create meaning for itself because it can't come from within itself. I
So
think
what did you
to
not?
get to that meaning, I think you have to have something behind everything else.
So why didn't you? What did you not like about? Because I thought the Aristotelian account succeeded in saying here's a way, here's a reason why you should be act in a virtuous way, and it's because that's your unique function, and that's what it is to be a good human being. If you want to be a good human being, then you have to then you have to act virtuously, and that gives you a reason
That-
to act rationally. It might not motivate you,
Yeah.
but it gives you a reason.
It does. It
So-
gives you a reason.
So your complaint is about motivation.
No, I'm trying to get to why I disagree with that. I just guess I'm having a hard time.
Okay.
So if you say this is your function, well,
Mm-hmm.
I think that saying that there's a function to something is saying this is better than something else, right? By saying, oh, this is your function, it's better that you fulfill this function than not fulfill this function. Why? Why? I'm not going to the why a specific person should do this thing. I'm saying why is this function better than something else?
Okay, so why is it the case? So there's a premise in Aristotle's argument that goes like, X is good only if X performs its function, and you're saying why is that premise true?
There's an assumption that this function is the good thing, or there's an assumption that there's the good thing at all.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe it sounds like you really are objecting. You're saying, look, you got this premise here. You're saying that the premise is something is good only if it performs its function well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why is that premise true? And so the way I motivated it was using some examples of how we normally talk about things like hammers and stuff. We say, hey, that's a good hammer, or this is a good game.
Created by a person who's made it with a specific function.
Yeah, how about like a good tree?
But what's the function of a tree?
I don't know, to bear fruit, maybe to like shade people from like, I don't know, the apocalypse or something. And it seems like, I mean, we call like natural things good too. Well, that's a good cat,
do.
you know.
Yeah.
So why can't we say the same thing about human beings?
Yeah.
It's a good human being.
So why can we call anything good? Is it where does the ability to call anything good or to make the assessment? Not the ability. It's more than that. It's like,
what's the legitimacy of calling anything good because it performs its function? So you'd be saying, okay, well, these arguments, these like examples don't work because I'm wondering why you should even call a hammer good just because it performs its function well.
mm-hmm. No,
maybe
or even saying that is the function, you know. Does that make sense?
You would want to deny that hammers have functions, like roles that they're supposed to play?
Hammers have functions because we created hammers to do a specific thing.
Oh, so how about natural things
that are created by humans?
Okay. So how about a tree? Do you want to deny that a tree has a function?
No, I wouldn't, because I think that they're
they're created by something else.
Yeah, I think they're created for a function, right? I think they actually do have a function to do something, but I don't know how you get to that function. I don't know how you say that there's a created for a specific thing without going back to a god.
I wonder if this is how the teleological argument goes. Can I check that real quick? Because now I'm actually curious about that's how the teleological argument. I started the teleological argument that I had no idea how it's supposed to work. I wonder if this is how it works. Okay. Maybe you've... Oh, wait, it's just a design argument. The teleological argument... So this reliable website, which is not... Yeah. Is an argument for the existence of God, or more generally for an intelligent creator, based on perceived evidence of deliberate design in the earlier world. That sounds like
maybe
I don't know.
The same thing, yeah.
I think it maybe at least it's a version of it. You're saying, look, there's a purposefulness to these things. That seems like design.
Mm-hmm.
So I said the teleological argument and the design argument, but maybe they're actually the similar arguments. So how could somebody who says there's no God say that there are certain things with certain functions? Does having a function entail that there was a being that endowed you with a function?
And I don't know what you do with that.
Yeah, So there's a way to motivate your view and to say, look, how did you show that human beings have functions? Well, you started off with artifacts, things that people create, and those are things that have functions because we gave them functions.
Yeah.
So let's generalize and say, hey, anything which has a function because it was given to it by something else. So maybe God gave or maybe some intelligent being gave it a function. So maybe if we have a function, that's only because God gave us a function.
Well, I don't think you can get to the function without a God. Now,
Right. That's
if
the
you're
conclusion.
arguing, if you're an atheist or whatever, if you're arguing, hey, nothing actually has an inherent function, and maybe it's the case that somehow we as humans can give things functions, but I don't think you can argue for a function for us as humanity or humans themselves. Because we experience things that have functions, like a hammer is made for hammering nails, right? Or
Yeah.
pulling up nails if you use the other end. But if you look at the natural world, like I don't think you can make a good argument to say, oh, these things have specific functions if you don't bring in something that gives them a function.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how to respond to that on behalf of the atheist. They
I'm not
could,
laughing because I feel like I've won or anything like that. I just think it's
it's fine. I don't mind. Um, I mean, because I'm not an atheist, so if they lose, I'm so much the better for me, right? I think this is one of those things where it seems to go to grounds in your intuitions. Do you intuit that? Does it seem to you like a thing without a creator could have a function, and some people might just pound their fists and say no, God damn it, and then somebody else will say yes, God damn it, yes, natural selection, damn it. um, that was a joke. So they'll say yes, things have functions without having a designer that gave it a function. But how are you supposed to motivate one intuition over the other? And I know you've got one that you can give. You can say, well, how did you motivate functions for human beings? You use artifacts. So what's the atheist or the supposed to say in response to that? Somebody who thinks that there can be functions without a creator. I don't know what they're supposed to say in response to that. They could say, look, maybe everything has a unique function. Whether we're created or not, there is something we're uniquely able to do, which is engage supposedly in rational activity. But that's different from saying that that is our function.
yeah.
And it certainly wouldn't follow that we're good to the extent that we can perform that thing that we're uniquely capable of performing. That doesn't seem to straightforwardly
You might be
follow.
really, really, really good at killing people, right?
Yeah.
Which
Um,
maybe you're like, well, that people have engaged in war, and that's just part of how humanity exists. So maybe you're meant to kill people in war,
yeah. Somebody.
or maybe
Yeah.
it's
Actually,
just a hunch, right?
yeah. Somebody's working on a dissertation where they're trying to say, look, this Aristotelian view of goodness doesn't work because it makes too many things good that you'd want to say are evil. And so you need to supplement it with this idea of a Platonic good, which is independent of like just the things performing their functions.
Yeah.
And that would mean like maybe that's God, So
Yeah.
maybe yeah. So now I'm getting drawn towards your view that maybe you need a God in order for their things, not just for moral motivation, but maybe for things to be good or bad at all. At least on the Aristotelian view. Well, shit.
So
Maybe I got.
that's my sticking point. So my sticking point is where did everything come from, which you had some answers to, which I think were more satisfying. But then it's just like, where do we get? Well, you can get morality. We already talked about that, but where do you get like the assumptions underneath morality?
Yeah,
Where do those come from? And
I think your sticking point is that you're saying, look, to tell me that we've got morality without God, you need to have um, natural things like human beings to have functions. And it seems like you can't have that unless you've got a God existing. Right.
it's a
So,
roundabout way for me to get like how I got to it, I guess. Or
no, it's fine. Um, Let me think. Yeah, I don't know. I think even if you are wrong about that, I don't see how you're wrong right now.
yeah,
And I probably never will. So,
I'm sorry.
uh, so yeah, I'm agree with you. Then the Aristotelian view doesn't work. So we're back to your original proposal, which was that maybe you go off of like if you have the evolutionary view in your pocket, you can say things like, well, what's useful for survival and stuff like that. But then you're back to but then again, you already pointed out, you can't. That doesn't seem to give you motivation to do what's useful for survival. I mean, why should I care about the survival of the species if I could be happy or something at the moment, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Um,
If you look at it at the big picture species view, then you're like, oh, it makes sense because this is toward the survival of the species. But once you get personal with things like that, it's just like, well, should someone actually care about the survival of the species? because you can definitely, I think you definitely can live a good life and not necessarily care about the survival of humanity as a whole, right? Now you can care
Yeah.
about the people around you and like have really great connections with the people around you, and maybe that'll help with the survival of humanity as a whole. But you're really just working from you can work from your own personal from where you are as a person, like
Yeah.
subjectively.
So survival of the species, or being useful to survival of the species, isn't necessary for something to be good, or for someone to be good.
It isn't necessary for someone to perceive something as good. I'm not going to say isn't necessary for something to be good.
Oh, I thought you were saying that. I mean, you could live a good life without being caring about the survival of the species.
I was saying that you can live a life that, at the very least, is perceived by that
Okay,
individual person
gotcha,
as good. Now,
gotcha,
can you
gotcha.
also live a good life without caring about the survival of the species? I would say probably.
Okay,
I don't know. I'm not certain about that. I don't know.
that's okay. I'm not certain about that either. I wonder though, like, could someone point out, like, okay, let's just say there's no God exists, evolution is true. Um, does it follow that what's useful for the survival of the species is good? In a sense, it's useful for the species to help it continue to exist, but is that really good or
Yeah.
goodness? And
I
it
don't.
seems like maybe it's not, because I can imagine you can imagine a scenario where maybe like committing genocide for some reason would be help the species, like continue to exist. Maybe if it's like, hey, I don't know, it wouldn't be hard to come up with some kind of weird, bizarre scenario where you're forced to commit genocide, otherwise the whole universe, every home population gets destroyed or something like that.
Yeah.
And it still seems like genocide is wrong,
Yeah.
one way or the other, and that would mean that but it'd be useful for the survival of the species. So if goodness is just helping the species survive, then that means that you would have to call genocide good, but you don't want to call genocide good. So whatever survivability does, it doesn't make things good or bad.
Yeah. And you can
That said,
look
that
back. Go ahead.
I was gonna say that said, utilitarians would probably say in that case genocide would be right because it overall has good consequences. But utilitarianism is stupid. So
Well, I mean, through it, like in history, things like that have happened where you kill
yeah,
off certain people because you think it's going to be more beneficial. I mean, that's the whole premise of eugenics, right? If you kill off certain people who have specific traits that are not desirable, like, let's just say we go like as positive as we can with this. Let's just say we
yeah,
kill off people with specific genetic, or we don't let them breed. Not even kill them,
okay, yeah,
just don't let them
yeah,
breed. We don't let specific people breed who have specific genetic issues, right? People
yeah,
who pass on specific diseases, or people who pass on specific like chromosome issues and different things like that. Well, if you get rid of those genetic issues within the population, that's going to help in the future with the species as a whole.
yeah.
How is that evil? And I would say that's evil.
Right. Right. So that's a better example, because
It's
that gives you a
actually
case where survivability would dictate that it's good, but it's not good. So survivability doesn't dictate what's good.
yeah, it's actually
Yeah.
it's not maybe it hasn't happened specifically in that case, but people have tried to make it happen
Yeah. Yeah.
at the very least. Um,
Yeah.
in some cases, people actually enacted it, but we'll get into that. So yeah, so
Yeah.
I would say that that's not a good thing. Like if you're I would go so far as to say as a maybe I wouldn't go that far. As a general rule, if you're making people go against their own will, it is
Hmm.
a that is bad.
Okay.
Actually, yeah, as a rule, I would say if you're making somebody go against their will, if you're infringing on their will, you are doing something that's bad. And I think that that is applicable because if you're
Okay.
someone who, if you're like, well, somebody's like, well, I want to go out and I want to be a serial killer. Well, that person is going against somebody else's will, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
there's probably a case where you could be like, well, what about this case right here? You know, um,
Yeah. But you gave it. You said as a general rule, not all
yeah,
the time.
yeah. There's
Yeah. Yeah.
specific cases where I would say, okay, we can
Yeah.
figure that out and figure out what exactly I mean by that, like what exactly
Yeah.
that would entail. But
Yeah. Um, yeah. So I guess now I'm getting pushed towards the original view that, or I'm pushed towards a different view, which is that you need God for moral motivation, and you need God in order for there to be moral facts at all. And or at the very least, I think you need God for moral motivation, but it also seems like I'm not sure how you would get morality without God. Maybe there's some other story to be told, but I don't know what it is yet.
Yeah, maybe we're completely wrong, and unless we have we have an undeniable religious experience that isn't connected to drugs, then without that, we can't be like, well, God exists, certainly.
Yeah.
Unless, like, you die and then you see God, then there you go.
Yeah.
Which I hope that if the Christian worldview is correct, that God has enough grace to overcome the doubts I have. Which aren't huge. I'm not like, I'm not certain whether this is correct or not. It's more like, do I know for certain? I'm like, no, I don't, because I
Yeah, I don't know for certain either.
I'm just gonna, I don't know, end it now. All right, thanks for coming on. I guess I'll see you later. I don't know what's going on. See you later.
Wait, are we done talking?